Hi, I'm Matt Griffiths-Rimmer. I'm the Director of Communications and Impact at Hadley Property Group.
From Ackroyd Lowry, I'm Oliver Lowry.
And I'm John Ackroyd.
And this is Urban Forecast, the show where we talk to the people defining the future of our cities. We discuss their background, what drives them, and the insights they've learned along the way.
This is a podcast for anyone who's interested in how we live, work or play in the cities of the future, and what that means for the built environment today.
So Matt, thank you so much for coming in, for you to trek it all the way over here. And I thought it'd be useful to start with your sort of journey. We like to understand the background, people behind the sort of the route into the industry. Would you like to start with yours?
Yeah, thanks very much for having me, Ollie. My route into the industry is quite a weird one, to be honest. So I spent my 20s and the first part of my 30s as a musician, very well-travelled and quite poorly paid. And so I found myself not able to afford to move to London when I was about maybe 27, 28, something like that. And we were, most of the time, we either needed to be in London or out on the road. So we were touring quite a lot at the time. Signed to quite a small label, but they were quite well backed. So I did lots of cool things for a few years, but then didn't sell any records. So the only way that I could afford to come to London was by taking a lease on a kind of a live-work unit, more of a work unit up in Harrogate, in Hermitage Road, and Amiga Works up there. And so myself and the guitarist and some other slightly more DIY enthusiast musician friends came down, built the space out. My dad came down, plumbed in a shower, etc. We built a studio in there. And I think when we first moved there, which was probably the end of 2007, it was a big industrial estate with maybe 3 or 4 peppered sort of artist students within that. And by the time we left it in about 2013, there were maybe 2 businesses left, and the whole thing had gone artist and then everything that was affiliated with it. Crazy, really. And around about that time, the council, just probably about 6 months before we went, the council started to enforce on building regs, and there was a big crackdown. And the landlord, who I had met quite a few times, who's a lovely guy called Shillham, he said to me, "You're all crazy artists, how am I supposed to talk to you? You're trapeze artists, gymnastics, all sorts." And I said, "Well, we could do some engagement stuff, we could do some art trails and some kind of informal sponsorships and that kind of thing." And he was very keen to do that. And so I set myself up, not intentionally really, just doing that alongside music, running a studio, etc. And fell into that. And then we ended up defending the community quite successfully at Appeal, getting a new sort of planning designation and stuff. And at the time I knew nothing of planning designations or anything like that. And then he asked me to do some more work with him to help him try and place some properties that he was trying to move and stuff. And I think it was really just the fact that I looked vaguely approachable and I could wear a suit if necessary. There was enough to get me in through the door there. And then maybe about a year's worth of doing that later, I helped him and some of his associates place some properties, and one of them was with Hadley. And so I met Andy and the team at Hadley really early in my journey into property. And we became friends and spent 6-9 months trying to do things together until eventually a new chief operating officer, Mark LeBain, came in. We got on really well, and he said, "I think you should come in and be our head of comms." And I was like, "Not really, I haven't really done that before." He was like, "Well, it doesn't look like you've done any of this stuff before, but didn't seem to have stopped you." So yeah, that was my route into the industry. And then I think communications then just evolved into a load of other stuff as well. So all of our sort of impact and social value work, all of the kind of placemaking, and a lot of the things that slip between the cracks with development are what we like to really drill down and get into, so that it doesn't just become like a big sort of PM process. But yeah, so it was like a case of either being given extra remit or just grabbing it from here, there and everywhere.
And do you think that sort of, I suppose, that creative start, you're sort of straddling the worlds of the kind of creative and the development, the property side, and those two can be uncomfortable bedfellows sometimes. Do you think the fact that you've come from one to the other allows Hadley to go about their placemaking in a more sensitive way?
I think that might be true, yeah. Not necessarily through me exclusively, but amongst my team, there's musicians. Lisa's a musician, she's still a practicing musician. Mabel as well. Mabel's a counsellor from Bexley. She looks after our kind of all of our outreach and all of our engagement. I think we all have we don't necessarily have the most conventional routes in, but I think your point on the creativity, I think that at times it does add a little bit more credibility, because you're not quite the same as the other people from that world that people have met sometimes. But we all come at it from a position of absolute mistrust normally when it comes to communities. But at the same time, I think that if you can talk to people honestly, and sometimes, a bit of different life experience is probably valuable for that.
Yeah. And you obviously weren't with Hadley from the start, but would you be able to give a bit of a background about their sort of evolution and then up to the kind of the vehicle that they now are?
Yeah, I've worked with them for quite a long time. It's probably upwards of 8 years. Around about the time that Andy became chief exec and Mark became, that's Andy Portlock, and Mark Lebain, who became the COO, the company rebranded, and it really wanted to push those kind of the regen credentials and try and do a lot more ground up. And I think that there's some quite politically active people at Hadley, and we're not from the traditional sort of property stable of that. So it's the local authority engagement came quite naturally to people because everyone was aligned around issues around regeneration, social justice, etc., that kind of thing. So Hadley has gone from strength to strength in that capacity, and that the schemes that we work on now are pretty big. IQL North is just about to be submitted over on the Olympic Park, and that same sort of creativity and that different entry route, I think, was probably my biggest source of imposter syndrome as well, because when you look at what's happening on the park and what's happening in that part of Stratford, and then you go into your first meetings down there, and I was thinking, this is the big league down here. But then you realise that, look, everyone's just bringing their own thing to it. And again, that kind of a genuineness of approach, which I think Hadley's good at.
And I think actually there's, in those type of areas, there's quite a lot of small businesses and creative industries that will probably appreciate being dealt with by somebody from that background rather than somebody from a more kind of institutionally property background. So I think you'd have an advantage there.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. I think that's often the case with partnerships, to be honest. And I also think that applying a bit of resource and a bit of energy to those partnerships is also, that can't be underestimated, really. I think just giving people more time and trying to spend a bit more time to add another layer or something to make it a bit more coherent, then I think that really comes across. So
you've got 3,500 homes. This is taken from your ESG report that I read this morning, so apologies if it's out of date. 3,500 homes you've developed, 1.7 billion GDV. And the quote that I liked, which I thought summed up, I think some of the themes that we've covered already, is the quote is, "Our company exists to create value for our investors and the communities within which we deliver schemes. These go hand in hand." And I think that's what you're getting at, really, is that you can enrich both. There's a sort of win that you can create. Is that something you're consciously thinking about?
Yeah, very much. Yeah. And I think that in terms of the investors' angle, the world of investment that we know in real estate has changed quite a lot over the last sort of maybe 6 to 7 years. And a lot of the things that we were really focused on doing anyway suddenly became, fashionable's the wrong word, but suddenly became more relevant. They became more central, and they stopped being like, people would stop thinking of the soft stuff, of it being soft, much more intrinsic to an application. And to investors, I think as well, that ESG part of it is not, it's not a nice to have anymore. It's a must have. Exactly. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Although I do still struggle with metrics a bit, and in terms of those measurements, I think that what we still find is that the most relevant stuff is the case studies. Like, so when we're dealing with investors on a one-to-one basis, they're much more interested in the impact that happens to individuals, families, or to small businesses, etc., than that kind of 70 million of social value created, which really just doesn't mean anything to anyone.
Yeah, and I think some of the E and the S, the E is easier in some ways to make metrics out of, and the environmental part. The social value is something that's, I think, as you say, difficult to measure, but from what I know about you, that's the part that you're most passionate about. Do you want to give some of those case studies of the ones that have really you felt very passionate about that have delivered social value?
Yeah, I think that there's a few that spring to mind. We have a partnership with Brompton that we've been involved in for about 5 years, where we started in Merton on Station Road, just by the River Wandle. It's a scheme that we were bringing forward then. We wanted to incorporate sustainable transport into it. I'd met Julian from Brompton a few months previous, and he was very much leading us like a purpose-driven business there. And we're quite aligned from early conversations. And so they were just doing their Wheels for Heroes NHS rollout, where they were giving key workers bikes for the duration of the lockdown. I can't remember what it was. And all these bikes, they were all coming back. And we said, look, we can help you place all them if you want, because we have outreach into all these communities. And so why don't we do 3 months on, there was a Clarion estate, and we were doing some work with Clarion at the time. So we just asked Clarion's estates team and their regen team to go with us, to go out and just try and find the people that didn't have access to cycling, that might get something from it, that just might have something change, just a behavioural change piece really. And Brompton were very clear that they weren't trying to sell Bromptons, they just wanted to get people cycling. And so what we did find is, I think we gave 120 bikes out over the course of about 9 months, and they all came back with a massive increase, a massive uplift in people just wanting to go, especially because they were coming out of lockdown, so people were taking the time to ride a bike down the river more, going to the park and stuff. And I think it was a really empowering position really empowering place to put the project in. And then recently, our work at IQL North in Stratford is the site on the edge of the Olympic Park. We opened a community gardens there, and the marketing suite that was on site already, we turned into a health and wellbeing centre. Now we've just had planning for our second phase of that, which includes community saunas. We've moved over a little cafe kiosk place from across the way because his lease was running out with the previous landlord. And all of these have been done on social value leases. And so all that we've said is we have no interest in bringing any money in from anything that you're doing, but we do want you to offer subsidised or free rates, just whether that's to key workers, whether that's to people in the area. So it's been like part of a 2-year engagement process for IQL North, which is a really difficult place to engage because in that part of Stratford, they're so used to having development happen to them. They're trying to get people out to consultation events just
because they've lost faith in it having any sort of meaning and purpose.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, they presume it's already been done, and but you're constantly talking to everyone down there, and it gives us a chance to test out a community charter that we've been working on for the past year as well, which is all around nudges for businesses that may be coming into the scheme around how you might treat all of the different sort of metrics of sustainability. Like we said, whether it's environmental, social, or economic, holding people to account on that, but then also pushing residents to get involved in volunteering options and the programming of the public spaces, that kind of thing. So it became quite a movable and evolving feast, but quite rewarding when you talk to people, especially about things like the garden, who are just like, yeah, it's really brought everyone out of those apartments in that area. Where's it going to be in the completed development, and helping us to shape that space to make sure that the legacy continues.
That's good that there is a tool such as a garden to do that, because I think a lot of that site after the Olympics felt very soulless and very placeless.
Yeah.
And I think placemaking is a word that gets bandied around, but I actually feel architecturally the spaces were not bad, but it was this kind of absence of meaning that meant that when you went to that area sort of around the Olympic site, you just felt it was a bit of a ghost town. And I think it needs something like that community garden to really bed people's like lives into that new fabric.
And I think the developer has an obligation around that as well, because we do a lot of work with the LLDC Regen and inclusive growth teams, and they're great. They're well resourced, as you would imagine. That's a mayoral vehicle to deliver regeneration. But they've been fantastic, and they brought a lot of energy and a lot of ideas to us. But in actual fact, whereas we're quite thankful for that, they're also quite thankful that we can execute, because they can't otherwise. They need the landowner, and they need some kind of boots on the ground energy. And I think that we can contribute that, so it works quite well in that kind of
And
partnership.
so often it's the small businesses that really bring the place to life, more so than just people living in apartments. If there's nothing for them to do, nothing for them to spend their money on other than a Sainsbury's local, which I think there is there in that scheme, it's those businesses that kind of generate that sense of place more so than anything else. I know you did a lot of quite innovative engagement techniques during lockdown. What are your sort of most recent ones in terms of engaging with businesses, bringing businesses together to deliver good placemaking?
I think that, like, I was just thinking about I wondered if you'd ask us about that, about the kind of the digital engagement piece. I was actually thinking we need to refresh it a little bit, really, because we created that platform at the start of the first lockdown, and then evolved it on each project that we had. We just added some more functionality, so there was a kind of a virtual room that you could walk around and answer questions within it, and then we spent much more time on social, just doing the actual questionnaires, etc. within that. But then I think, to be honest, in order to engage the local businesses, it's been much more boots on the ground. We've been out knocking doors much more, or we've been having events, and our team and the project teams do a lot of the careers fair, etc., that kind of thing. But in terms of actually getting to know a place, then the half a dozen Bromptons that we've got in the office are probably the most useful thing.
Yeah.
Because then you can just go out and just pound it a bit and just go and talk to people, attend some of the sort of interest group meetings, and I guess try and get there early enough for people to go, oh, okay, there's time for us to have some impact in this.
And overcome that suspicion that anything they say is just going to be...
Yeah, it's just become a line in a report or a submission, yeah.
How do you make that... How do you make them feel that sense that change will happen through some of this stuff? If you feel that there's almost this scepticism from previous promises not being realised, or development being done top down, how do you re-engage with those people? How do you deliver on those? How do you make them feel like you're going to deliver on the promises?
I think that it's a case of almost taking yourself out of both parties and appearing as a middleman or as a sort of deal maker. Because what we would find is when we were engaging with community groups and they are a bit distrustful, then going, yeah, but look, we all know how the world works, and we all know that developers want one thing, we all know that investors want one thing, and ultimately, if you can get something for you, then let's just do that.
Yeah.
So even if you don't really have a lot of time for my industry, which I fully understand, then let's see what we can make our industry do that makes it a bit better over here. And so I think it's probably that more than anything.
Yeah, so you get to act almost a bit like an agent on behalf of...
I think so, yeah.
Slightly separate yourself.
Yeah, and I'm not quite sure where that's the first time I've really considered that, to be honest.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it probably is something along those lines.
Interesting. And that, I'd imagine, extends to when you're dealing with meanwhile uses, or are they being used now as part of this sort of testing ground for ideas? Do you want to talk about a little bit about your experience of those meanwhile uses and how they impact on the eventual development?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. So like I said, there's a sort of circular conversation that they create, full stop, when you can go, look, these gardens are going to be open, we'll be staffing it, or we'll be doing events there, etc. And just learning people's names and keeping those conversations going, like that's been really useful. But at the same time, test beds for stuff, that's one of the things that's quite difficult to get across in sort of planning applications for meanwhiles, because you're asked for specifics, but really you're going, we're just going to try some stuff out, and we're willing to put a bit of resource behind it. We've got a 2-year planning journey here, so we're not going to do anything crazy, and hopefully you can generate enough trust to try and... I'm thinking about one of the things that we've just got consent for is an aeroponics hub, so like a vertical farming shipping container solution, but we needed £250,000 in order to get that up and running. And when that grant didn't appear for that, then I'm looking at the planning permission going, wow, yeah, we've got permission for that. I'm not quite sure that we're going to be able to make that land here, but you have to try. Do you know what I mean? You could. Yeah, I think that in terms of the testbed work, loads of research up front, whether it's by ourselves, the project team, the design team, or relevant consultants, and then just throwing it all into the middle, trying to find the most cohesive strategy that works with what your development aspires to be, and also not trying to crowbar things in. Do you know what I mean? I think that can cause problems. But if you stay true to what you're trying to actually achieve with the development, then loads of these ideas pop up, I think.
I think there's also a danger. You mentioned before that you used to live in Dalston, and the most successful / unsuccessful example of meanwhile use is the curve gardens there, which are so successful in their own merit that they are now becoming permanent. And I think it's going to be very difficult to deliver what was meant to be delivered in the end because of the success of that as a place for the community. Do you think there's a reticence in the industry now to try and do something like that again?
I know that example that you're talking about very well, yeah. Both from when I lived there. Yeah, absolutely, yeah. I think the clarity of message and honesty is probably the most important thing there.
So it's a similar example in your scheme. You're providing gardens, and they'll be used as a mechanism to bring people together, and then in the eventual development they will be reconfigured or moved.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And one of the most rewarding aspects of that is that we're just about to give a couple of jobs on site as a way of making our consultants redundant. So we started that project by bringing in consultants to help us set up that garden and to help us set up the wellbeing facility as well. And now we've spent enough time with those communities and with local residents to go, okay, well, maybe do you want to take this over?
Yeah.
And so so there's a couple of jobs that are starting after Christmas on those, and they will take us through the next sort of 3 or 4 years while we go through construction and stuff. So construction is being phased, so hopefully we can keep the facility open for as long as possible, and then talking to the mayor of Newham, Roxana, about the best ways to try and house that garden somewhere for a year that's still close by, so we can then bring it back in and not lose continuity. I think that's the most important thing for these conversations, and for trust in general, really.
You mentioned political engagement, and you mentioned Roxana, who we know well here. Do you find there are certain boroughs that kind of get and trust you as developers in being able to implement their vision? Are there some boroughs that get it more than others?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And without naming names. I think that's very much a case. I think that you can get a lot done with a cabinet member for Regen, a leader, or for instance in Roxana or others' case, a mayor, just by talking about vision, and also trying to remain flexible in what you're offering enough so that it works for everyone. Do you know what I mean? And you were doing an event at the Labour Party conference this year, weren't you? And we were going to try and hook up around that. And I thought the Labour Party conference was great this year. We've been there in some dark years, 2015 onwards, where you were just sort of like,
I did Brighton under Corbyn, and it was just mad.
Me too, man. Yeah.
He was rapping along to Stormzy on stage, singing "Fuck Boris," and I was like, it was the first one I'd been to, and I was like, this place is mad, and it just didn't seem very unlike anything. It seemed so devoid from the reality of delivery of anything substantial that it felt like a student event. Whereas this year it felt like an event that was around. It felt like an event geared towards business, the business of governing, certainly. And most businesses were there representing themselves, understanding that this was a party. Whether or not you support Labour, I think that most people have agreed that now is the time to start engaging with them as a party of government.
I think that's a very accurate summary of that whole sort of period, really. Because myself and some of the guys have been members for years. I think Mark was a member since about 84, 85. But yeah, we were there in that 2015-16 period, and it was a bit like just people shouting into the void, really. And there wasn't really a lot of room for us to add a lot of value. There's always room in the conversations with local government.
Exactly, they're all there, and so I felt that even that, whatever it was, 2017, 2018 that I went, still worth going, because I think that most things to do with our industry that happen meaningfully happen with local leaders and local mayors, and they're all still there, trying their best.
And just they need a refuge, right, where everyone can go and have a sensible conversation. So you get to still meet them and have the conversations with them, despite what central government is saying. And so that, I don't think that changes year to year necessarily. But the context around it changes. Yeah, and this year was quite compelling, wasn't it? I think that, and also I love Liverpool, spend a lot of time there, and I felt like this. I think that was a really sensible move from them last year to do it again in Liverpool. I think they've got a deal for another 3 years or something like that. Yeah, but it works well on the dock. That's a very good example of regeneration. I was talking to Roxana whilst we were down there. We were walking around, and in fact we were talking about Boys from the Black stuff from the 80s and all about the particular episode about the death of the docks, because they've obviously got a huge plan over at Royal Docks.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it was very good, just to go back 2 points. It was very good, as you said, to see people focus on the business of governing, and you can really see, I think you can see quite a marked shift on a bit of a march towards the election, to be honest.
No, definitely. And I think that when it comes to anything to do with regeneration, placemaking, engaging with these local leaders, it's so important that actually there's a space to listen to them. I think a lot of developers, perhaps where they get it wrong is they come in and try and tell local authorities what the solution should be, And I think that often they know already.
Yeah,
and
they do. Yeah, they definitely do.
If you ask them,
they know more than us anyway.
Part of what we do with these Breakfast Club briefings and with all the events that we do is around trying to create a space outside of the pre-application process and a planning application process where you can just listen to one another's voices. Because what we find with our events is that more often than not, people agree.
Yeah.
So you've got developers and local authority leaders and planners all going, no, we're all saying the same thing, you know, and it's just about then trying to create wins.
That framework that does exist, right?
Exactly.
No, I couldn't agree more. And to be honest, half the time, if you can even get the planners out of the pre-app process, I think it's the same. And you can just there are conversations that can just be had, but I find it. I find sitting around a table a very engaging thing to do with a senior politician who really knows what they're trying to do in an area.
Yeah. Awesome. I think I'd like to finish up on the last part of the conversation, talking about what next for the market, what next for Hadley. How do you see the next few years progressing?
So I'm no market forecaster, as you probably ascertained, but I think that the work that gets me most excited about what we're doing is that kind of multi-tenure mixed use and really trying to get under the skin of the changing ways that communities live, and that social integration piece. So you've got an existing community, you've got a forthcoming community, and that forthcoming community might come from all ends of the world, or certainly all ends of the country. And I find that cohesion really interesting, and I think the next couple of projects for Hadley are going to be very much focused around that. I think that phased multi-tenure approach to development, certainly on a kind of medium to large scale, is definitely the most interesting work, and certainly in London. Yeah, and that's where all of my work is really. I don't know. We've done some work in Bristol, but I don't know the other sort of urban locations. And I feel like London sort of sits in its own ecosystem, doesn't it? I think it has a different approach in terms of development. Most things.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And but are you seeing there must be a certain shift just in the pure economics of the world of away from wanting to have a lot of for sale residential stock? That must be something that you are having to engage with as a business.
Oh yeah, completely. Yeah, absolutely. And IQL North contains PBSA, BTR, built for sale, and of course traditional various affordable types as well. So so that when I say mixed use, not just commercial, civic, educational, and above the build to sell. No, there's not as much build to sell now at all. But that's just the evolution of the city as well as the funding models as well, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. And I think these things are all cyclical in any case, and you'll probably get in a few years' time, everyone suddenly realising there's an oversupply of PBSA, or perhaps not that, but maybe the rental, and it will balance back. And what about yourself? What's the next for you? Have you got any aims to do more kind of political stuff? Or are you happy having moved from music into property? Is this your forever home?
I don't think that I'm going to go into... I think my time as a musician will have put paid to any aspirations I've got of being a politician. Too many skeletons, right? But no, it was... Look, I love working in and around politics, and I think that the way that Hadley's set up gives me an opportunity to do some quite interesting and quite varied things. And politics and creativity, and wherever possible, purpose-driven placemaking. If you can forgive the alliteration, I swear that's not a thing I've rolled out before.
Yeah, on that purpose, Bill, I think good time to wrap it up. Thank you very much for your time.
No, thank you very much for having me.
Cheers. If you enjoyed the show, then please subscribe and give us a review, ideally a 5-star one. And if you want to know more, please go to ackroydlowry.com or follow us on Twitter @ackroydlowry and Instagram with the same. This podcast supports Land Aid, the property industry charity that brings together the sector to deliver life-changing projects for young people who really need it. Visit www.landaid.org to find out how you can help end youth homelessness.